On December 10, 1931, a search party in Arizona's Superstition Mountains found a human skull resting among the rocks and desert brush. It was identified as belonging to Adolf Ruth, a 66-year-old retired government veterinarian who had entered the mountains 6 months earlier carrying maps to a legendary gold deposit. The remainder of his skeleton and personal effects were found the following January, separated from the skull by rugged terrain. Almost immediately, Ruth's death became part of the treasure story he had gone there to investigate. Some reports claimed that the skull showed evidence of a gunshot. His family suspected murder. Later local histories emphasized that Arizona authorities did not accept murder as proven and considered exposure, dehydration, or starvation more likely. Even the famous note associated with Ruth, often summarized with the Latin phrase veni, vidi, vici, exists in versions whose wording and interpretation have been disputed. The uncertainty was enough. Newspapers turned a regional legend into a national mystery. The missing map, the skull, the desert, and the idea of a mine worth a fortune formed a story almost impossible to resist. But Ruth was not searching for a mine that had vanished from reliable records. He was searching for a mine that had never been securely documented in the first place. That distinction changes the investigation. The question is not simply where the Lost Dutchman's mine lies. It is whether the legend grew from a real but misplaced source of gold, a secret prospect never legally recorded, a cache confused with a mine, or a chain of stories that became more precise each time the evidence became weaker. To answer that, we have to move backward from the skull in 1931 to a German immigrant who died in Phoenix 40 years earlier. And then separate the man Jacob Waltz from the character the American West created after his death. The man called the Dutchman. Jacob Waltz was real. That is the first firm point in a story crowded with uncertain ones. He was born in Germany, which explains the nickname Dutchman through an old American confusion between the words Dutch and Deutsch. He reached the United States in the 19th century and spent decades in the American West. Records connect him with mining, prospecting, ranching, and farming in Arizona Territory. One documented detail is especially important. In January 1865, Waltz registered the Big Rebel mining claim in the Walnut Grove district of Yavapai County. This does not prove the Lost Dutchman story. It proves that Waltz was not merely a fictional hermit invented after his death. He had practical experience with mineral claims and the mining economy. 1. What the record does not show is equally important. No verified claim filed by Waltz has been found for a fabulously rich gold mine inside the Superstition Mountains. There is no authenticated survey, production ledger, or shipment record, partnership agreement, or legal document that identifies such a property. That absence is not automatic proof that the mine never existed. Prospectors sometimes concealed discoveries, delayed filing claims, or worked small deposits informally. A man with a very rich and easily accessible vein might fear theft or claim jumping. Yet secrecy creates its own problem. A mine that produced repeated loads of valuable ore would require excavation, tools, transport, food, water, and some way of processing or selling the material. Each step creates witnesses and physical traces. Later accounts described Waltz arriving in Phoenix with remarkably rich ore while refusing to identify its source. Some said he made secret journeys into the superstitions. Others claimed that he had a partner named Jacob Weiser or Wisner, whose disappearance added another layer of suspicion. These stories were recorded long after the alleged events and differ sharply in detail. The safest conclusion is narrower. Waltz was a genuine miner who may have possessed gold, or whose source was not publicly known. The evidence does not establish its amount, grade, or origin. It could have come from a small prospect, a known mine, stolen high grade, or a cache, trade, or a deposit outside the area later attached to his name. This is where the legend begins to perform a subtle transformation. It takes a real man with real mining experience and fills the gaps in his record with the most dramatic explanation available: the deathbed that created a map. Jacob Waltz died on October 25, 1891, at the Phoenix home of Julia Thomas, who had cared for him during his final illness. A contemporary obituary described him as a German native who had spent decades in Arizona mining and ranching. It did not announce the discovery of a secret fortune. The treasure story emerged through what people said happened around his deathbed. Julia Thomas and members of the Petrash family later claimed access to clues describing Waltz's gold. Another tradition gave a larger role to Richard "Dick" Holmes, who was said to have received Oran directions from the dying prospector. The two narrative lines do not fit together cleanly. Each produced descendants, supporters, maps, landmarks, and arguments over who had heard the authentic version. This conflict is not a minor detail. It is the engine of the entire legend. A precise written set of directions could be tested. A signed map could be examined. A legally described claim could be relocated. A deathbed conversation is different. It depends on memory, interpretation, trust, and the condition of a seriously ill speaker. Even honest witnesses can leave the same conversation with different versions. The landscape made the problem worse. Directions in the legend refer to canyons running north and south, military trails, saddle-shaped ridges, rock faces, shadows, stone houses, water sources, and weaver's needle. These are vivid clues, but many can be matched to 2. Multiple locations. A rock shaped like a face becomes convincing only after someone decides which direction the face should look. In 1892, less than a year after Waltz died, Julia Thomas joined Reinhardt and Hermann Petrash on an expedition into the superstitions. Local historical research places their departure on August 11. They took a wagon before discovering that the terrain made it nearly useless, then continued with pack animals and searched in brutal summer conditions. After roughly 3 weeks, heat, hunger, and lack of water forced them back to Phoenix without gold. A territorial newspaper mocked the effort under a headline about another lost mine being hunted by a woman. The tone matters. It shows that even the earliest public version was already recognized as belonging to a familiar Western genre: the ancient miner, the secret bonanza, and the deathbed revelation. Thomas later became associated with maps derived from the clues. In 1895, a San Francisco newspaper article helped organize elements of the story for a wider public. By then, the mine was no longer just something Waltz may have known. It had become a narrative that could be printed, sold, copied, and improved. The Peralta story enters the mountains. The next layer pushed the mine backward in time. According to one of the best-known versions, members of a Mexican family named Peralta had worked extremely rich mines in the Superstitions during the 1840s. A large expedition supposedly returned in 1848 to remove gold and was attacked, leaving the secret known only to a few survivors. The area called the Massacre Grounds preserves this story in modern geography. Arizona State Parks presents the account carefully, using words such as supposedly and according to legend. That caution is justified. No authenticated Mexican mining records, expedition list, burial site, or accounts, or contemporary report has established a Peralta operation and massacre in the superstitions on the scale described by the legend. The name itself carries complications. The American Southwest contains genuine Peralta families and genuine Spanish and Mexican land histories. It also contains the famous 19th-century Peralta land grant fraud created by James Addison Rivas, who forged documents in an attempt to claim an enormous part of Arizona and New Mexico. That fraud was not the origin of every Peralta mine story, but it demonstrates how easily the authority of Spanish documents, noble families, and lost grants could be manufactured in the borderlands. In the Dutchman legend, the Peraltas solve a narrative problem. If Waltz did not discover the deposit himself, someone needed to show it to him. A centuries-old family mine gives the gold a history, explains why the entrance was concealed, and supplies maps whose authenticity is difficult to test. It also imports a violent frontier framework in which indigenous people are often reduced to attackers guarding treasure. The actual history of central Arizona was far more complicated. Yavapai and Apache communities faced accelerating invasion, military campaigns, forced removal, and violence as prospectors and settlers entered their lands. A treasure story can 3. Reverse that history, presenting outsiders as rightful miners and indigenous resistance as an obstacle to wealth. None of this proves that Mexican prospectors never entered the region. Mining and trade crossed modern borders, and undocumented exploration certainly occurred. The issue is scale and evidence. A small party examining mineralized ground is plausible. A large, highly productive mining system that vanished without records, workings, tools, or identifiable transport routes requires much stronger proof. If this kind of evidence-first investigation is useful, consider subscribing. The goal is not to make old mysteries less interesting, but to make the surviving evidence more interesting. Then the exaggerations. What the geology actually says. The Lost Dutchman story survives partly because Arizona really is mineral country. Copper, silver, and gold shaped the territory's settlement and economy. Productive districts existed within a day's travel of the superstitions. The Goldfield and Mammoth operations near the western mountain front showed that valuable ore could be discovered in the wider region. A prospector carrying rich specimens through Phoenix would not have seemed impossible. The Superstition Mountains themselves are geologically dramatic. Much of the western wilderness consists of volcanic rocks produced by ancient eruptions and later carved into cliffs, needles, ridges, and narrow canyons. The eastern region contains older granite, schist, sedimentary rocks, and complex faulting. To an untrained observer, iron staining, quartz veins, altered rock, and abandoned pits can make almost any canyon look promising. In the 1970s, the U.S. Geological Survey and Bureau of Mines conducted a broad mineral assessment covering about 244 square miles of the Superstition Wilderness and adjoining roadless land. Their report did not say that the mountains contain no mineralization. It identified 2 zones near the southern margin with possible mineral resource potential and documented old prospects and anomalous concentrations of several metals. But the overall conclusion was severe. Most of the area showed little promise for mineral resources. The report stated that the general geologic environment offered little promise for an important gold deposit that could have been found using 19th-century prospecting methods. It suggested that the Lost Dutchman could probably be placed among folk tales. That embellished historical reality. Why does that wording matter? Because the legend usually describes a deposit so rich that Waltz could remove high-grade ore repeatedly with simple tools. Such a body should not merely exist somewhere at depth. It should be exposed or accessible enough for a 19th-century prospector to recognize and work it. The government survey found mineralized areas, but not geological support for the vast hidden bonanza of popular storytelling. There are limitations. A regional study cannot inspect every covered fracture or sealed tunnel. Erosion, landslides, and human concealment can hide small workings. Gold can 4. Occur in narrow pockets too small to register as a major resource. The survey therefore does not disprove every possible mine or cache. It changes the probabilities. A small, rich pocket is more plausible than an enormous lost system. A source near the wilderness boundary is more plausible than a deep interior empire of tunnels. Or taken from a known district is more plausible than a deposit that escaped claim records. Generations of prospectors, geological mapping, aerial photography, and modern exploration. The geology permits a mystery. It does not support every version of the legend. The first searchers built the template. Julia Thomas and the Petrash brothers failed to find the mine, but their expedition established the behavior that thousands of later searchers would repeat. First came the belief that one possessed a unique clue. Then the landscape was translated. Through that clue, a certain ridge became the correct saddle. One canyon matched the deathbed description. One shadow fell at the right angle. Each partial match increased confidence, even when the full route failed. This process is called confirmation bias, but in the superstitions it becomes physical. The terrain is so broken that a searcher can continually find new candidate landmarks without admitting that the original premise may be wrong. A route that fails can be blamed on a washed-out trail, altered vegetation, a collapsed entrance, a mistaken compass bearing, or deliberate concealment. The clue system also protects itself from disproof. If the mine is not found, the searcher may conclude that one clue was misunderstood. If old workings are discovered, they become evidence of the Dutchman even without identifying artifacts. If no workings appear, that proves how successfully Waltz concealed them. The maps multiplied because uncertainty created a market. Some were based on memories attributed to Julia Thomas, the Petrash family, or the Holmes family. Others invoked the Peraltas. Later stone maps introduced carved symbols, hearts, crosses, trails, and Spanish inscriptions. Their dates and creators remain disputed, and none has led to a verified Lost Dutchman claim. The legend became modular. Searchers could combine the parts they preferred: Waltz's clues, Peralta maps, a military trail, Weaver's needle, a massacre site, a stone monument, or an astronomical alignment. Contradictions did not destroy the story. They created more versions of it. There is a financial explanation too. Maps, books, guided expeditions, newspaper stories, museum exhibits, films, and tourist destinations generated value whether the mine existed or not. This does not mean every storyteller was dishonest. Many genuinely believed the evidence. But a legend that supports an economy gains institutions that preserve it. The first search also contained a warning. Thomas and her partners entered the mountains in August, underestimated the heat and terrain, and returned exhausted. Later seekers would repeat that error with more serious consequences. 5. In the superstitions, the treasure hunt was never only an intellectual puzzle. It was a navigation problem inside steep volcanic country where water is limited, temperatures can become lethal, and a small injury can make self-rescue impossible. Adolf Ruth made the legend national. By 1931, the Lost Dutchman story had faded in and out of public attention for 4 decades. Adolf Ruth changed its scale. Ruth was an educated older man with experience in government service and a serious interest in lost mines. He arrived with documents he believed connected to the Peralta tradition. Despite warnings about summer conditions and his physical limitations, he entered the wilderness in June and established a camp near Willow Spring. When he failed to return, searchers spent weeks looking through extreme heat. No confirmed trace of him was found until December, when the skull appeared far from the original camp. The rest of the remains were located in January 1932. The physical evidence generated competing stories. Ruth's pistol was reportedly found loaded. His maps and papers became the subject of disagreement over where and when they were recovered. A disputed report attributed holes in the skull to a bullet, while local authorities did not conclude that murder had been established. Predators, exposure, a fall, disorientation, and dehydration offered ordinary explanations for the separation and condition of the remains. The famous written message intensified the mystery. Later retellings often say Ruth wrote, "Veni, vidi, vici, I came, I saw, I conquered," followed by a clue placing something across from a cave. But reproductions, transcriptions, and handwriting claims have generated their own disputes. The note proves that Ruth believed he had identified something important only if the wording, authorship, and timing are accepted. It does not prove that he found Waltz's mine. The murder interpretation was dramatically satisfying. If Ruth died naturally, his expedition was a tragedy caused by terrain and heat. If he was killed, then someone else knew the gold was real and was prepared to protect it. Murder transforms the absence of the mine into evidence for the mine. That logic is powerful and dangerous. Every unexplained death can become a guardian story. Every missing map can imply theft. Every gunshot reported in the mountains can suggest a hidden syndicate. The documented reality requires no conspiracy. A man entered a severe desert wilderness. At the worst season, became separated from help, and died. The exact medical sequence is unknown. Foul play cannot be excluded with absolute certainty, but it was never proven. The public effect is undeniable. Ruth's death gave the mine a body, a date, and a mystery that newspapers could reproduce. The Lost Dutchman was no longer only a 19th-century local tale. It became America's dangerous treasure hunt. 6. Why nobody can agree on the clues. A normal mining investigation begins with a fixed location and asks what happened there. The Lost Dutchman investigation begins with a story and asks which location can be made to fit it. That reversal produces endless disagreement. One group places the mine near Weaver's Needle because it is the region's most recognizable landmark. Another argues that the needle was only a distant reference point, and that Waltz deliberately misled listeners who focused on it. Some search the western volcanic terrain. Others move east toward older rocks that seem more favorable for mineralization. Some place the source outside the modern wilderness entirely. Even the word mine may be wrong. Waltz could have known a natural exposure, a shallow pocket, an abandoned prospect, or a cache of or transported from somewhere else. If the object was a buried cache, geology becomes less important. If the ore was stolen from another operation, the superstitions may never have contained the source at all. One skeptical explanation points toward high grading, workers quietly removing unusually rich ore from a functioning mine. Waltz had mining experience and lived in a region where ore circulated through camps, mills, merchants, and assayers. A small amount of spectacular specimen rock could create a large reputation without requiring a private mountain bonanza. Another possibility is geographic drift. The earliest story may have referred broadly to country east of Phoenix, while later authors narrowed it to the most dramatic interior of the superstitions. Local place names changed. Trails shifted. The boundaries understood by a 19th-century resident were not identical to modern park and wilderness maps. A third possibility is narrative fusion. Waltz's unknown or older Mexican mine legends. Stories of violence in the mountains, Julia Thomas's search, the Holmes clues, and Ruth's death may have originated separately. Later writers combined them into one continuous history. This theory explains why the story feels detailed but resists verification. Each layer contributes specificity. Together they create the impression of independent confirmation. Yet the layers often depend on one another or were recorded after the legend had already spread. What would genuine confirmation look like? A mine alone would not be enough. The superstition region contains many prospects. Investigators would need a securely documented working whose date, tools, or geology and historical associations connect it to Waltz. Ideally, ore from the site would match authenticated samples traceable to him. A map or letter would need a verifiable chain of custody. Names, dates, and physical evidence would have to converge. No discovery has met that standard. The strongest ordinary explanation. The most economical reconstruction begins with a small amount of truth. 7. Jacob Waltz was a real prospector. He may have possessed rich gold ore. He may also have spoken about its source during his final illness. People close to him believed enough of the story to risk money and health searching the mountains soon after his death. But the source was probably not the giant secret mine that later legend required. The ore may have come from a small pocket that Waltz exhausted. It may have come from a known or newly discovered district near the superstitions. It may have been obtained through high grading, partnership, trade, or a cache. Waltz may have exaggerated it, protected it, or deliberately issued contradictory clues. His listeners may have misunderstood him. After his death, Julia Thomas and the Petrashes converted incomplete verbal directions into a search route. Their failure did not end the claim because the story could blame memory and terrain. Printed accounts standardized some clues while adding others. Peralta. Tradition supplied an older origin. Later maps turned narrative into apparent documentation. Ruth's death supplied danger and national publicity. This explanation fits the geological survey, which found limited mineral potential in parts of the southern wilderness but little support for the enormous, easily worked deposit described in folklore. It also explains why generations of searchers found mines, pits, mineralized rock, and suggestive landmarks without establishing the Dutchman's identity. It does not prove there was no hidden working. A modest, concealed prospect could remain undiscovered, destroyed, or misidentified. The superstitions are vast and rugged, and not every cavity has been mapped. But the burden of proof must remain proportional to the claim. A small forgotten prospect is ordinary Western history. A mine so rich that it could make fortunes, known through a Mexican dynasty, worked secretly for years, protected by killings, and still undiscovered after modern geological study is an extraordinary claim. The difference between those possibilities is the difference between history and legend. The legend grew because it continually exchanged one kind of evidence for another. Missing documents became proof of secrecy. Failed searches became proof of concealment. Deaths became proof of guardians. Contradictory maps became proof that only one was authentic. Once that system formed, the mine no longer needed to be found in order to survive. America's greatest treasure hunt. What is confirmed? Jacob Waltz was a German-born Arizona miner and rancher who filed at least one documented mining claim and died in Phoenix in 1891. Julia Thomas and the Petrash brothers searched the Superstitions in 1892 after claiming access to his clues. Adolf Ruth entered the mountains with treasure maps in 1931 and died there under circumstances that inspired controversy. The region contains real mines, real mineralization, and exceptionally dangerous terrain. What is documented only as a claim? 8. That Waltz repeatedly worked a secret mine inside the Superstitions. That a Peralta family operated a major gold system there and lost its members in a massacre. That Waltz revealed a complete route on his deathbed. That Ruth found the mine and was murdered for his map. What remains possible? Waltz may have known a small prospect, cache, or rich pocket whose location was lost. Some later clues could preserve fragments of genuine geography. An unidentified old working could still exist. What is unsupported? The certainty with which maps, stone symbols, murders, curses, and secret guardians are often presented. No authenticated chain of evidence connects all those elements into one history. The Lost Dutchman legend is therefore not empty. It preserves the psychology of mining. Frontiers, sudden wealth, unstable records, private claims, ethnic misunderstandings, violence, environmental danger, and the conviction that one more ridge may reveal everything. It also reveals how Americans manufacture treasure. Gold creates the first value. The search creates the second. Books, maps, identities, friendships, rivalries, tourism, and inherited quests become valuable even when no ore reaches the surface. The most enduring treasure may be the unfinished explanation. A found mine would become a location, a claim number, an assay, and eventually a depleted working. A lost mine can remain limitless. So the final question is not simply whether gold lies somewhere beneath the Superstitions. The geology leaves room for small discoveries, and history leaves room for missing details. The harder question is this. After more than a century of contradictory clues, failed expeditions, disputed deaths, and no verified mine, what evidence would treasure hunters actually accept as proof that the Lost Dutchman never existed in the form they have been searching for?